Good evening, everyone. Here we are at the Bay of Bengal Conversation, and it's truly a conversation because we have with me Mr. Badiul Alam Majumder, I should say Dr. Badiul Alam Majumder, his secretary SHUJAN Bangladesh, and we have Faris Hadrovic from Bosnia Herzegovina, and he's an expert in building relationship between business and government. So we have these two very distinguished guests, and our topic is kleptocracy and the global anti-corruption efforts. So first, I will introduce this topic in less than 2 minutes, and then I'll turn to our guests, our distinguished guests, for their opinions and comments. So it would be a kind of free-flow discussion about corruption and what is being done to arrest corruption worldwide. So first I'll say kleptocracy. The word is a rather mixture of two words. Klepto, it's a Greek word, it means theft. And cracy comes from the word, kratos, which means rule. So kleptocracy means rule by the thieves, or theft is the main focus of any particular rule. And this concept was first used with regard to Spain many years ago, 100 years ago. And in recent discussions, we see that this word is being used with regard to a number of African countries, and there's a politics involved as well. And then we also need to look at the anti-corruption efforts at the global level. And there in Bangladesh, Transparency International, which is a Berlin-based organization, that name is very familiar. But we also need to recognize that World Bank, for example, has an anti-corruption unit, and they have actually a vice president in charge of integrity. And other than World Bank, we have United Nations. They have United Nations, UNDOC, and they have within UNDOC an anti-corruption commission. So there are a number of organizations at work globally to arrest and to reverse the trend of corruption worldwide. And we really need to keep that in mind, that corruption is not just an African problem, corruption is not just a South Asian problem, that we have corruption even at the heartlands of the core economies of the world. So we really need to expand our discussion of corruption. So first I'll turn to Dr. Badiul Majumder and would get his reactions, his feedback on what is his view of corruption and kleptocracy, and what are his suggestions that can be used to reduce, if not to stamp out, corruption. Dr. Majumder.
Thank you. Well, corruption is everywhere now, and big corruption, small corruption, and the retail corruption, and wholesale corruption, and mega corruption. And it's unfortunately in most of the developing countries and low-income countries, this has become really endemic. This is everywhere. And this is basically use or misuse of power by the powerful. And this is by the rich, basically the stealing from the poor. And and they do it in many ways. And there are lot of innovative ways, so-called innovative ways they do these things. And this is basically an outgrowth of globalization. And they do it through, for example, over-invoicing, international trade, under-invoicing, and then the padding of the values of the projects and getting kickbacks and all those things. And in Bangladesh, unfortunately, it has become really a serious problem. And it has become, there has been corruption always. There were corruption from the very beginning, and even before the creation of Bangladesh. But over time in Bangladesh, the corruption has become more widespread, and in fact, in many cases, it's a shameless corruption. They are not even ashamed of stealing and engaging in this criminal act, and they do it with impunity, unfortunately. And we need to do something about it. One of the reasons why it's expanding, especially in recent years in Bangladesh, is because the accountability system has broken down. There are two types of accountabilities. One, downward accountability to the people through elections. After every 5 years, if the people in power have to come back to the people and beg for votes, then they will have to pay attention to the views and opinions and and outrage and the complaint of the people. But unfortunately, that has broken down in this country. We do not need any more votes.
But that's interesting that you touch on the politics of corruption, that how a political system can produce corruption, and that would take us to Central and East European countries that you are more familiar with. Do you see an increasing trend of corruption since the collapse of so-called really existing socialism, corruption of the Soviet Union and corruption of deconstruction of Yugoslavia? Do you see that state, this state making and state unmaking has something to do with corruption? Could you shed some light on that, please?
Certainly. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and excitement of being at the Bay of Bengal Conversation in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. This is my third time here already.
Good.
In
You're an old timer now.
And I can see the progress that Bangladesh is making in terms of development, but also in terms of its international standing. And I'm excited to see that Bay of Bengal conversations and conferences of this sort bring more attention to issues of this part of the world, and in particular Bangladesh, which has been, we can say, a rising star recently in the last few decades in terms of economic development. But we've seen economic development in all parts of the world. A lot of wealth has been generated in the last few decades all across the world, which has inevitably, of course, led to more cases of corruption. You're absolutely right. Corruption has been present since the dawn of time, and the forms of corruption are changing as the world is changing and as we have more means to do it. But also more efforts and more ways of countering corruption are also visible. Going back to the part of the world which I'm more familiar with and where I've been based and spent most of my career, you're absolutely right. With the breakdown of a certain system, and that was the case in the case of former Yugoslavia, in particular in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'll tell you why it's particularly challenging in Bosnia. We've seen a decline of institutions. We've seen a rise in kleptocracy. Of course, a lot more opportunities. We have to keep in mind that in that particular case, we've seen a whole system change. So we experienced the fall of the Eastern Bloc or communism and a certain style of governance that was in place, a socialist system, very much related to a communist style system, but not as harsh or as crude as it was in the former Soviet Union dominated countries. Now, Bosnia is specific because not only has it gone through a transition from a state-controlled socialist into a market economy, but it has also went through a very devastating war, and most of the region has as well. And that brought in, of course, a destruction of one previous system, but also of the institutions that were in place, and new institutions had to be built, taking into account the new realities. That, of course, created a lot of opportunities. An additional complicating factor in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina was the fact that the war ended in '95 with the Dayton Peace Accords, which divided the country basically into two different entities, and then subdivided one of the entities into 10 cantons, with one district and a state level. So in effect, a country, a very small country, especially in comparison to Bangladesh, a country which had about 4.5 million people before the war, now is probably somewhere around 3. There has been a lot of emigration as well from the country. It has 14 governments. We have over 150 ministers at different levels of government. So the complex governance structure, of course, has certain benefits in terms of, so there's no direct centralization, there's a lot of decentralization, which has certain benefits, but then there's also a lot of drawbacks, because the systems of accountability are a little vaguer, so to speak. So we've seen endemic corruption, unfortunately, in the country, manifested through different means, which has stifled the growth of the economy, which has still been impressive, as it has been all across the world, including Bangladesh, despite the corruption that is present everywhere in the world, unfortunately. It's the extent and the visibility of it is different. And I'll say that in the post-war years, up until recently, there was a lot more international involvement in the country. And some of the institutions that you've mentioned, like international NGOs like Transparency International, have been and are still present and call out regularly. We also have had more presence of international intergovernmental institutions such as the United Nations and other donors who have attached strings to certain aid both in terms of anti-corruption, but also in terms of reform agendas. That has brought some benefit, but with the changing political climate across the world, we see that there's less effort being put on anti-corruption, but more on regional stability, regional cooperation, geopolitical issues. And that has, of course, as soon as you take eyes off something and concentrate on something else, gives a little more room for activities or nefarious activities everywhere.
Thank you very much, because I could see some parallel between what's going on in East Europe, in the former socialist countries, and the emergence of India. So soon after India, from 47, in the late 50s and early 60s, researchers, and in particular I'm thinking of the Swiss writer, Asian drama, Gunnar Myrdal, and he used the term soft state. And the idea of soft state is that the state is there, but the state is not very effective. And the contrast would be hard state, and the hard state would be Singapore. And that's why you find Singapore within top 3 countries in the world in the Transparency International report year after year. It's within top 3, top 5. And they achieved that through hardening the state. So I have 2 questions, one, and they're related. The one is the issue of institutions that most economists talk about these days, that you need to strengthen and build institutions to, not only to build the economy, but also to fight corruption. The second related question that I would ask Dr. Majumder is the question of historical corruption, that we don't live just in present. Present is a legacy of the past. Absolutely. So would you see something like colonialism itself is a huge system of corruption, and how that colonialism has impacted societies that we call post-colonial societies?
Yeah, thank you. Let me address the first issue, the issue of the strengthening and weakening of institutions. See, what we have seen, especially in Bangladesh, the presence of corruption led to the weakening and further weakening of institutions, and also stealing people's rights through by legislating the laws, which really takes away people's lot of rights we used to take for granted, and then development of autocracy, the all power getting concentrated in one or few hands, and so institutions are undermined, laws and regulations are framed to really promote and protect the interests of those in power and the top echelon. And so we have seen the erosion. With the expansion of corruption, there has been erosion of institutions. And I talked about the downward accountability, voting system is gone. And then the parallel accountability system through parliament, the standing committees of the parliament, and even the other constitutional bodies, as well as the bodies that are created by law, and for example, Anti-Corruption Commission, and it has been eroded. This has become a paper tiger basically, and the government uses basically not to combat corruption, but to give certificates of the clean bill of health, sort of. And so there has been erosion, and so unless we can prevent the erosion of institution and strengthen the institutions and really make sure that the parallel accountability system works, then we do not have much of a prayer against corruption. With regard to the historic, the effect of the historic, experience of exploitation, and this is a corruption. Basically, the people from other countries, other land came here and exploited us and stole our wealth, and took to their countries and invested and made them, and they became prosperous. They became prosperous. Unfortunately, the corruption, the nature of corruption has changed. Now, the corrupt people in this country, they steal money in various ways, but they don't invest in the country. Unfortunately, they don't feel safe. So it's a double whammy. It's not only stealing from the or kicking in the stomach of the poor, but also taking this money away outside the country, and they are deprived of the benefits of this accumulated wealth. If that wealth would have been invested, then that would have created jobs, that would have created opportunities. So it's a double whammy, this present corruption, and these are also learned behavior, the bad things, and you learn from the past, and if you learn and you do these things, and if you can get away with it, if there is no retribution, no punishment, then these only are encouraged. So in the colonial era, and their single-minded goal was to exploit and to take the resources from here. But so we learned from them, but we are now doing it doing the same thing in a sense. We are amassing the wealth, stealing wealth, and taking abroad rather than investing here. And so we are following that pattern.
So it's interesting that you said that, because in the colonial system it was a geographical exploitation, but now it's your exploitation within the country. So corruption geographically, now corruption internally.
Internally, but then
the
it turns into
money is
geographical too, because
the money is remitted overseas.
taken away.
That's an interesting observation. Do you see similar parallel? Because I was in Estonia and then recently in Croatia, and I was very impressed by what's going on in Estonia.
That's a very good example.
And I was amazed, that has become a role model. Do you see that fighting corruption and making the society not only free from corruption, but giving it a direction that we really need to catch up with technology, with AI? That's what Estonia is doing. Could you comment on that?
Those are
please?
very good, actually, points, and thank you for raising that. You gave two very good examples, both Estonia and Singapore, and maybe we can focus on Singapore because I think it's the best example in the world. I think everybody can agree. There are certain drawbacks in terms of the system of governance, and there are certain challenges and criticisms, but everybody can agree that it's a very...
With respect to rights, yeah.
Absolutely, but we can all agree that it's a very well-functioning system and a system that has provided ample opportunity for all Singaporeans. And I think if we go back to the 60s and the establishment of Singapore, and of course it always starts from the head down, as they say, the fish
starts the rot.
Starts the rot from the head. So how you set something, and that's true not only within a country, but even within an organization, within a team, within a family. How the head of a family sets the direction of a family is how the family will develop, and that you can, take that analogy and just build it up. Now, Singapore had a clear vision and wish, and they understood that their position geopolitically, politically as well, where they were based, who they were surrounded, and what was their particular opportunity. And they decided to make themselves a very efficient, structured country and economy. And we see the results of Singapore. And I hope that Singapore will continue in that, because that has been instilled. And to preserve that, they've created strong institutions, because we're all here temporarily, all of us. And whether in life, but also in position. And it's what is it that we want to leave as a legacy behind? And we can talk about issues of patriotism and bringing in benefit and increased welfare to our populations if you're in positions of power. Unfortunately, we see that currently, as there is so much wealth and so much money being thrown around the world has never been richer, never been better off in the history. We see opportunities and people seizing opportunities for personal quick enrichment and making their own families and compromising that for the rest of the population. And that, of course, it may have a temporary effect for a certain group of people, but in the long run, once those people are gone, and they will be eventually, it leaves a system in place that it's much harder to change a system which has already been established, and particularly as you've mentioned, culture. It becomes culture. Corruption becomes culture. It becomes normal.
Culture of corruption.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned another important one. It's the generational thing. People being raised in a certain system, expecting it to operate in a certain way, don't know better. And they expected that's it. I've seen that with the younger generations coming up. They've seen it from their predecessors, from their seniors, and they've seen how systems work, and
it becomes the norm.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned, you pointed to generations, because when I was teaching in Singapore National University, one of my senior colleagues, who is a recognized specialist on corruption, Professor Alatas, he once told me that look at Singapore, an entire generation of Singaporeans have grown up without knowing and without ever paying a penny in bribe.
Exactly.
And that's a huge achievement of a country, and that's a great tribute to their founding leader, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's what he pointed out. So at one level, it looks like a trade-off, because sometimes you have a kind of democracy that we have in many of the developing countries, which becomes a kind of patrimonial system, that you have to have money to go for election and go in for election. So it kind of perpetuates, a culture. But in some cases, you come very hard and create this hard state, and you have a zero tolerance for corruption. As in Singapore, you have a better chance of stamping it out.
Absolutely.
Maybe a short-run solution. We don't know yet.
And also, another
But
thing.
at the last round, I just give you 45 seconds each to share any concluding remarks that you may have.
Well, the not only corruption, not only impedes our growth and prosperity, but also eats away the core of the nation. There is a famous book by a lady from Carnegie Endowment for Peace. Sarah Chase is the name of the book is The Thieves of States. And she wrote about Afghanistan. When she was a journalist, and in early years she was telling the generals that there is corruption, there is violation of human rights, and all of these you need to pay attention to. And then those generals were saying that let's take care of the security, then we'll look into that. And she tried to impress upon that that's what security is all about. And also one other thing that I want to mention is that this corruption, this which is growing and everywhere, and the Western system, the flexibility and the liberal system was taken advantage of. Now they need to take some responsibility. There are some ad hoc efforts, and I think there are some systematic efforts worldwide from the Western countries and the other countries which prospered because or benefited from this corrupt money, and so that these could be stepped out. So they need to take the responsibility too.
Absolutely.
I would like to refer back to a point you made, and that was Estonia and Singapore, which are related, and that's technology.
Yeah.
And that's one of the solutions in going forward in stamping out corruption, at least certain segments of it. We have, fortunately, technological advancements that provide us with opportunities both for transparency, but also for decentralization. And I think you mentioned Estonia. Estonia has been very progressive in terms of also blockchain technology, which is this new technology, which is the underlying technology for what we know as crypto and crypto world, but has ample opportunities because it's a decentralized system that is not controlled, cannot be changed. It's a ledger. It's always recorded somewhere in a certain block. And I think those are some of the technologies that could be used in the future and implemented across the world, particularly both in terms of elections, in terms of public services. It's also interesting, you mentioned that in Singapore, the younger generations or the people have grown up without ever paying for something. And you see that in certain other societies as well, in particular in Europe and Northern Europe, where certain services are absolutely normal, it's expected. And for example, back in my country as well, and I'm sure you have similar examples, if you want something done, if you want it done efficiently, you always need to call somebody, or you're asking if somebody can help you out, even if it's just help him out without even actually paying for it. But why do I need to, call somebody to get a certain service when it should be there naturally? And I think that's a system and a world we should strive for, at least in general terms.
Thank you so much. And Estonia is the only country that probably introduced online election.
Yes.
With that remark, I just want to thank you, both my distinguished speakers, and my name is Habib. And I thank you all for listening to our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.